I never thought my peaceful retirement would end with me standing over a neighbor's broken body in the rain, holding evidence of a crime that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. But that's exactly where I found myself on a gray October evening in Seattle, and nothing in my 60 years had prepared me for what came next. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the streets of our Ballard neighborhood into rivers of reflected streetlight. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the storm and thinking about nothing more pressing than whether my dahlia bulbs would survive another Pacific Northwest winter. That's when I saw David Park's silver Tesla coming down Greenwood Avenue, moving faster than usual for our quiet residential street. David was my neighbor 3 houses down, a polite young man who always waved and occasionally asked me to water his houseplants when he traveled for business. He ran some kind of tech startup from his home office, something about artificial intelligence and finance that I never fully understood. But I understood what I saw next. The Tesla's headlights swept across the wet pavement in a smooth arc, normal and controlled. Then, suddenly, the car jerked violently to the left. Not like someone swerving to avoid something. Not like hydroplaning on the slick road. It was mechanical, unnatural. Like an invisible hand had grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard. The car jumped the curb, crashed through Mrs. Henderson's white picket fence, and wrapped itself around the massive oak tree that had stood on that corner for longer than I'd been alive. The sound of metal crushing and glass shattering cut through the rain like a scream. I didn't think. I just moved. My phone was in my hand as I ran out the door, dialing 911 while my feet carried me down the sidewalk. The rain soaked through my cardigan within seconds, but I barely noticed. 911, what's your emergency? Car accident on Greenwood and 68th. I gasped, running as fast as my 60-year-old legs would carry me. Single vehicle. It hit a tree. Send an ambulance! When I reached the wreckage, steam rose from the crumpled hood mixing with the rain. The driver's side was crushed, but I could see David slumped against the deployed airbag. Blood tricklings were closed. David! I pulled on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. David, can you hear me? No response. I could see his chest rising and falling, shallow but steady. Thank God. Other neighbors began emerging from their homes. Kowalski from across the street appeared with an umbrella. Sarah Chen, who lived next door to David, stood on her porch with her phone out recording. Did you see what happened? Mr. Kowalski asked, holding the umbrella over both of us. He just swerved, I said, pressing my hand against the window, trying to get closer to David. It didn't look right, it looked wrong. The sirens grew louder. Within minutes, the street filled with flashing lights, ambulance, fire truck, 2 police cars. I stepped back as the paramedics took over, using hydraulic tools to pry open the door. They worked with practiced efficiency, checking David's vitals, stabilizing his neck, carefully extracting him from the wreckage. A police officer approached me, notepad in hand. He was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes that had seen too many accidents. Mom, I'm Officer Brennan. You called it in? Yes. I saw it happen from my window. I pointed to my house down the street. Can you describe what you saw? I told him, the speed, the sudden jerk of the wheel, the unnatural quality of the swerve. He wrote it all down, but I could see the skepticism in his face. Was the victim driving erratically before the crash? Speeding, weaving? No, nothing like that. He was driving normally, and then, Mom, we found several empty beer bottles in the vehicle. This looks like a straightforward DUI case. I blinked at him confused. Beer bottles. David doesn't drink. He's always been very health conscious. I've never even seen him with wine. Officer Brennan gave me a patient smile, the kind you give someone who doesn't understand what they're talking about. People aren't always what they seem, ma'am. We'll run a blood test at the hospital, but the evidence is pretty clear. Drunk driver, wet roads, lost control. Happens all the time. But the way the car moved, in accidents things happen fast. Sometimes what we think we see isn't exactly what happened. The rain, the darkness, it can be confusing. He wasn't listening. He'd already made up his mind, already written the story in his notepad. I watched as they loaded David into the ambulance, his face pale and still, an oxygen mask covering his nose and mouth. As the ambulance pulled away, I stood in the rain, that uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. The feeling I used to get when a student's essay didn't quite add up, when the words were right but the logic was wrong. Something about this accident was off. The swerve was too sudden, too precise. And David didn't drink. In 3 years of being neighbors, I'd never seen him with alcohol, not at the neighborhood barbecues, not at holiday parties, nowhere. The police began stringing up yellow tape. The tow truck arrived to haul away the crumpled Tesla. Within an hour, the street was clearing, everyone returning to their warm, dry homes. Just another accident on a rainy Seattle night. But I couldn't shake the image from my mind. That violent jerk of the steering wheel, like the car had a mind of its own. Or like someone else had been controlling it. I walked home slowly, my cardigan heavy with rain, my mind spinning. I'd taught English literature for 35 years. I'd read thousands of stories, analyzed countless plots. And I knew a good mystery when I saw one. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I reached my porch, I looked back down the street toward David's house. Dark windows stared back at me. He'd asked me to water his plants just last week, given me his spare key because he trusted me. That's when the idea formed. Probably a bad idea, certainly a nosy idea. But I couldn't help myself. I had a key to David's house. And if the police weren't going to look for answers, maybe I would. I waited until midnight. Not because I was planning anything illegal. I had a key after all. But because I didn't want to explain to nosy neighbors why I was entering David's house at this hour. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. David's craftsman-style house sat dark and silent. I let myself in through the back door, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt ridiculous. What was I even looking for? Evidence of what? Exactly. I flipped on the lights in the kitchen. Everything was neat, organized. A half-empty coffee mug sat by the sink. A calendar on the wall showed meetings scheduled for the rest of the week. Meetings David would miss while he lay unconscious in a hospital bed. I moved through the house slowly, looking for anything that seemed out of place. The living room was sparse but tasteful. Modern furniture, a few framed photos of David with his parents, what looked like a college graduation picture. In the corner sat his desk with a large monitor, but no computer tower or laptop in sight. That struck me as odd. David worked from home. Where was his computer? I checked his office next. A converted bedroom with built-in shelves full of technical books, whiteboards covered in diagrams and code I couldn't begin to understand. Another desk, another monitor. Still no laptop. The police must have taken it, I thought. But then why would they? They'd already decided this a drunk driving case. They weren't investigating anything. I was about to give up when I remembered. David had a detached garage. He'd mentioned once that he liked to work out there sometimes, said the separation from his living space helped him think more clearly. The garage was locked, but the key was on the same ring as the house key he'd given me. I crossed the wet backyard, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. This was clearly his real workspace. A long workbench ran along one wall, covered with circuit boards, tools, and pieces of electronics I couldn't identify. Another whiteboard displayed complex flowcharts with terms like pattern recognition algorithm and anomaly detection matrix. A mini fridge hummed in the corner next to a coffee maker. And there, tucked behind a stack of programming manuals on a shelf, was a sleek black laptop. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Why would he hide this? I opened it, and the screen came to life, displaying a login screen with a password prompt. Of course it was locked. I tried a few obvious things. His birthday, which I knew from his occasional Amazon packages. Password, 12345. Nothing worked. After 3 failed attempts, a message appeared, security protocol engaged. 5 more incorrect attempts will result in data wipe. I closed the laptop immediately. I wasn't going to risk destroying whatever was on there, but this confirmed something. David had hidden this laptop in his garage, behind books, password protected with serious security measures. This wasn't just a backup computer. This was something important, something he wanted to keep secret. I was carefully placing the laptop back when I heard it, a soft creak from outside the garage. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Footsteps on gravel. Someone was out there. I quickly shut off the garage light and pressed myself against the wall next to the window. Through the glass, I could make out a figure moving through David's backyard, heading toward the garage. The person wore dark clothing and moved with purpose, checking the back door of the house first, then heading my direction. My mind raced. Should I call out? Call the police? Hide? The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. I held my breath, pressing harder against the wall. My phone was in my pocket, but I was terrified that even the faint light from the screen would give me away. The handle rattled again, more forcefully this time. Then, suddenly, the person stopped. I heard rapid footsteps moving away, then the sound of a car door closing somewhere on the street. An engine started and faded into the distance. I waited a full 5 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally peeked out the window, the backyard was empty. Whoever it was had left. But why? Why would someone break into David's house the very same night he was in the hospital? Unless they were looking for the same thing I'd just found. I grabbed the laptop from the shelf and made a decision that probably wasn't wise. I tucked it under my arm, locked the garage, and hurried back to my house as quickly as my shaking legs would carry me. Once inside, I locked all my doors and windows, something I rarely did in our safe neighborhood. I set the laptop on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. I needed help. Real help. Someone who understood technology and security and could figure out what was on this laptop without destroying it. And suddenly, I knew exactly who to call. James Rivera had been one of my brightest students 15 years ago. A quiet kid from a difficult home situation who'd found his escape in computers and coding. I'd encouraged him, written recommendation letters, stayed in touch even after he graduated. He'd gone on to study cybersecurity, worked for several major tech companies, and then, last I'd heard, gone freelance after some kind of falling out with the corporate world. I pulled out my phone and searched through my contacts. There it was, James Rivera. I'd gotten a Christmas card from him just last year with his new number. It was almost 1 a.m, but this couldn't wait. I hit dial. The phone rang 4 times. I was about to give up when a sleepy voice answered. Hello, James. It's Clara Thompson, your old English teacher from Roosevelt High. There was a pause, then his voice came back warmer. More alert, Mrs. Thompson. Wow, it's been, 3 years since we talked. Is everything okay? James, I need your help. I know this is going to sound strange, but I've stumbled onto something. Something involving my neighbor and possibly his car being tampered with and a hidden laptop that I think someone just tried to steal. Another pause. Mrs. Thompson, are you in danger right now? I don't think so. But I need someone who understands technology. Someone I can trust. Can you come to Seattle? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I could hear him moving around, probably getting out of bed. I'm actually in Tacoma right now, working on a contract job. I can be there by morning. Text me your address? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thompson, don't open that laptop again. And don't tell anyone you have it. I'll be there by 8. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the black laptop like it was a snake that might strike at any moment. Outside, the neighborhood was silent, everyone asleep in their beds, unaware that something dark was unfolding on our quiet street. I made myself a cup of tea and waited for dawn, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. And wondering if David Park had known his life was in danger. James Rivera arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, just as the morning light was breaking through the Seattle clouds. He'd changed since I'd last seen him. Filled out, more confident in his bearing. Though his eyes still held that same intense intelligence I remembered from his high school days. Mrs. Thompson, he said, giving me a warm hug on my doorstep. You look exactly the same. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate it, I said, ushering him inside. Come in. I made coffee. He followed me to the kitchen, where the laptop still sat on the table like an unexploded bomb. His expression shifted immediately from friendly to professional. Is that it? Yes. I found it hidden in my neighbor's garage. James, before we go any further, I need to tell you what happened. Over coffee, I told him everything. David's accident, the unnatural swerve, the police's quick dismissal, the beer bottles that made no sense, the intruder in the night. James listened without interrupting, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Thompson, this sounds like something you should take to the police. They won't listen. They've already decided it was drunk driving. Then the FBI. If you're talking about corporate espionage, car tampering. With what evidence? A feeling, the observation of a 60-year-old retired teacher. They'll pat me on the head and tell me to go home. I pushed the laptop toward him. Whatever's on this. That could be evidence. James studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You were always the teacher who believed in finding the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. I guess some things don't change. He pulled the laptop toward him and opened it. Okay. Let's see what we're dealing with. He examined the login screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard but not touching it. High-level encryption. This isn't standard consumer security. Your neighbor knew what he was doing. He pulled out a small device from his backpack. Something that looked like a USB drive but more complex. I'm going to try something. This is a security bypass tool. It won't crack the password, but it might let me see what kind of encryption we're dealing with without triggering the data wipe. Is that legal? We're trying to help someone who might be the victim of a crime. Let's call it a gray area. He plugged the device into the laptop's USB port and began typing commands. Lines of code scrolled across the screen faster than I could follow. James muttered to himself as he worked, occasionally stopping to try different approaches. Interesting, he said after about 20 minutes. This encryption is military grade, way beyond what a typical startup would use. And look at this, there's a secondary partition that's completely isolated from the main system. Whatever your neighbor was working on, he really didn't want anyone to see it. Can you get in? Maybe. But it's going to take time. This isn't like in the movies where you type for 30 seconds and suddenly everything opens up. This could take days, maybe weeks. My heart sank. We might not have that long. Someone knows David had this laptop. They came looking for it last night. James closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand something. If what you're suggesting is true, if someone sabotaged your neighbor's car, if there's corporate espionage involved, these aren't people who play around. They've already put someone in a coma. They won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're a threat. I know. But I can't just do nothing. He smiled slightly. Yeah. That sounds like the Mrs. Thompson I remember. The one who wouldn't let me drop out of school, even when I wanted to give up. He pulled out his phone. Okay. While I work on this laptop, you need to do something for me. Go visit David in the hospital. Find out his condition, but more importantly, see if anyone else has been asking about him, and be subtle about it. I can do subtle. Also, I need to know more about his work. What was his startup called? What exactly was he developing? I'm not sure. He mentioned something about artificial intelligence and fraud detection once, but he never went into detail. I'll search for his company online, see what I can find. James packed up the laptop carefully. I'm going to take this somewhere safe to work on it. Somewhere with better equipment. Do you have anywhere you can stay for a few days? Just in case. You think they'll come back? I think whoever broke in last night knows David lived alone. When they didn't find the laptop in his house, they might start looking at his neighbors, especially if they saw you at the accident scene. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't thought about that. I can stay with my sister in Bellevue. Good. Do that tonight. But first go see David. And Mrs. Thompson, be careful. Don't let anyone know what we're doing. After James left, I sat alone in my kitchen, feeling the weight of what we'd started. I'd spent 35 years teaching teenagers about literature, about symbolism and character development and plot structure. But this wasn't a story in a book. This was real. And real stories had real consequences. I changed into respectable visiting clothes and drove to Harborview Medical Center. The hospital smell hit me as soon as I walked through the doors. Antiseptic and sickness and hope all mixed together. I found David listed in the ICU and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices. I found the nurse's station and approached a young nurse with kind eyes. I'm here to see David Park. I'm his neighbor Clara Thompson. She checked her computer. Room 4 WV. But I should warn you, he's still in a coma. The doctors aren't sure when he'll wake up. I understand. I just want to sit with him for a bit. He shouldn't be alone. She smiled. That's very kind. Go ahead. Room 4012 was dimly lit, filled with the rhythmic beeping of monitors. David lay motionless in the bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His face was bruised, a bandage wrapped around his head. He looked so young, so vulnerable. I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. Hello, David. It's Clara from down the street. I don't know if you can hear me, but I want you to know someone's looking out for you. A nurse came in to check his vitals. I watched her work, then asked casually, has he had many visitors? You're the first, actually. His parents are flying in from Korea, should be here tomorrow. Poor thing. So young to have something like this happen. No one else. No business partners or colleagues. She paused, thinking. Actually, now that you mention it, there was a man here yesterday evening. Said he was from David's company. But visiting hours were over, and ICU patients can only have family, so we didn't let him in. He seemed pretty insistent, though. What did he look like? Tall, well-dressed. Expensive suit. He left his card and asked to be called if David's condition changed. She pulled a business card from the nurse's station board and showed it to me. Marcus Chen, Technova Industries. Does that sound familiar? My blood ran cold. I stared at the name on the card, keeping my face neutral. No, I don't think David ever mentioned that name. Maybe a client. Maybe. Anyway, I need to finish my rounds. You can stay as long as you like. After she left, I took a photo of the business card with my phone before she could take it away. Then I sat back down next to David's bed. David, I whispered, I don't know what you stumbled into, but people are looking for you. Important people. And I'm going to find out why. His monitors beeped steadily, showing no response. But somewhere in there, behind those closed eyes, was the truth. And I was going to find it, even if it meant facing down people who wore expensive suits and had enough power to make a car crash look like an accident. I stayed for another hour, then drove home to pack a bag. Tonight I'd stay at my sister's house. But tomorrow James and I would start digging deeper. Because now we had a name, Marcus Chen, Technova Industries, and that was a place to start. I spent that night at my sister Linda's house in Bellevue, tossing and turning on her guest bed. Every small sound made me jump. A tree branch against the window, the house settling, a car passing on the street. I kept thinking about the intruder in David's backyard, wondering if they'd figured out I had the laptop. The next morning, James called at 7. Mrs. Thompson, I've been up all night working on this. You need to see what tell me over the phone. No. This needs to be in person. Can you meet me at the Seattle Public Library downtown? Main branch, 3rd floor, in the quiet study area. 11 o'clock. That's oddly specific. Public place, security cameras, lots of witnesses. Trust me on this? After breakfast with Linda, who thankfully didn't ask too many questions about my sudden visit, I drove downtown. The Central Library was busy with the morning crowd, people checking out books, students studying, homeless folks escaping the drizzle. I took the escalator to the third floor and found James in a corner study carrel, the laptop open in front of him. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "Sleep can wait. Look at this." He angled the screen toward me, keeping his voice low. "It took me all night, but I managed to get into the main partition. Mrs. Thompson, your neighbor, wasn't just developing fraud detection software. He'd created something much bigger." The screen showed a complex program interface with graphs and data streams I couldn't begin to understand. "Explain it to me like I'm 60 and technologically challenged." James smiled despite his exhaustion. "David's AI, he called it Sentinel, wasn't just designed to detect financial fraud. It could analyze patterns across multiple systems, predict market manipulation, and trace money laundering through complex shell corporations. It's the kind of tool that could expose massive financial crimes." And according to his notes, he'd already found something. He clicked through several files, showing spreadsheets filled with transactions, company names, and dates. 3 months ago, David's AI flagged unusual activity involving Technova Industries, money moving through offshore accounts, suspicious stock trades right before major announcements, payments to shell companies that don't seem to exist. Technova, that's the company on the business card at the hospital. Exactly. And it gets worse, look at this. He opened another file, an email exchange between David and someone named Michael Yates. David reached out to Technova's chief technology officer about potential partnership opportunities. He wanted to license his AI to them. But read the dates. I scanned the emails. The last one was dated 3 weeks ago. He was negotiating with them. He was trying to. But here's where it gets interesting. James opened a voice memo file. David recorded a phone conversation. "Listen." He hit play, keeping the volume low. David's voice came through, tense and worried. "Michael, I'm telling you this as a courtesy because we've been in talks. But I can't ignore what my system found. Technova is involved in something illegal. I have documentation. I'm planning to take this to the SEC next week unless you can explain these transactions." Another voice, older and smoother. "David, you're making a serious mistake. You don't understand the full picture. These are legitimate business operations. You're seeing patterns that don't exist. My AI doesn't make mistakes. The pattern recognition is 99% accurate. Then your AI is flawed. I strongly suggest you reconsider before you damage your reputation and your company's future. Technova could be a valuable partner. We could also be a formidable enemy." The recording ended. I felt sick. That's a threat. That's exactly what it is. And that conversation happened 4 days before his accident. James closed the laptop carefully. "Mrs. Thompson, David Park discovered that Technova Industries was committing financial crimes. He threatened to expose them, and then his car mysteriously crashed. We need to go to the police with this." "And tell them what?" "That we broke into his house, stole his password-protected laptop, and hacked into it. We've technically committed several crimes ourselves. But this is evidence obtained illegally. It won't hold up in court. In fact, it could get us arrested." James ran his hands through his hair. "I've been thinking about this all night. We need more. We need something that directly connects Technova to the car crash. Something provable and legal. The car. Could you examine the car's computer system? If someone hacked it remotely, would there be evidence?" James's eyes lit up. "Yes. Modern cars are essentially computers on wheels. If someone accessed the vehicle's control system remotely, there would be a digital trail. The question is whether the police have already examined it. They ruled it drunk driving. They probably didn't bother. Then we need to find out where that car is now. Probably an impound lot. And we need to get access to it before Technova does." He started typing on his phone. "Let me call a friend who works for the city. Maybe we can." He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. He grabbed my arm. "Don't turn around. Don't make it obvious." But there's a man standing by the biography section. Tall, gray suit, pretending to read a book. He's been watching us for the last 5 minutes. My heart started racing. "Are you sure?" "I've been trained in counter-surveillance. He's watching us." "What do we do?" "We leave. Separately. You go first, take the escalator down, walk through the fiction section, then exit through the main doors. Don't look back. I'll wait 5 minutes and leave through the 4th floor exit. We'll meet at Pike Place Market in an hour. The main arcade by the fish throwers. Lots of crowds. James, this is getting dangerous. I know. But we're in too deep now. If we stop, David might die. And whoever did this gets away with it." He squeezed my hand. "You taught me to finish what I start. Remember, when I wanted to drop out senior year, You told me that giving up was easy, but seeing things through was what separated success from failure. I don't remember being quite that philosophical. Well, that's how I remember it. Now go. And Mrs. Thompson, thank you for dragging me into this. I'd forgotten what it felt like to do something that actually matters. I gathered my purse and stood up, trying to look casual. As I walked toward the escalator, I couldn't help glancing toward the biography section. The man in the gray suit was indeed holding a book, but his eyes followed me as I passed. My hands trembled as I rode the escalator down. I forced myself to walk at a normal pace through the fiction section, past the checkout desks and out into the gray Seattle morning. Only when I was a block away did I let myself breathe normally again. Someone was watching us. Someone new. I spent the next hour walking through downtown Seattle, doubling back occasionally to make sure no one was following me. By the time I reached Pike Place Market, I was exhausted and jumpy. The market was packed with tourists and locals, the air filled with the shouts of fishmongers and the smell of fresh flowers. I found James near the fish throwing stall, pretending to admire the day's catch. He looked as rattled as I felt. Did you see him again? I asked quietly. No. But that doesn't mean he's not out there. James guided me toward a small coffee shop tucked into the market's lower level. We found a table in the back corner. Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to consider bringing someone else into this. Someone with authority who might actually listen. Like who? I have a contact. Someone I used to work with at my last corporate job before I went freelance. She left around the same time I did, said she couldn't stomach the ethics anymore. She went to work for the FBI's Cybercrimes Division in Seattle. Her name is Agent Sarah O'Caffer. Do you trust her? With my life. She's one of the few people in law enforcement who actually understands technology and corporate crime. If anyone will take this seriously, it's her. I thought about David lying in that hospital bed, about the man in the gray suit watching us, about the threatening phone call on that recording. Okay, contact her. But we need to be smart about this. Agreed. I'll set up a meeting. He pulled out a small flash drive from his pocket. I made a copy of everything on David's laptop, encrypted of course. If something happens to the original, we'll still have this. If something happens to us, let's not think about that. But his expression said he'd been thinking about little else. We parted ways at the market, agreeing to stay in separate locations for the next 24 hours while James contacted his FBI friend. I went back to Linda's house, and this time I told her everything. She listened with growing concern, then immediately insisted I stay as long as needed. That evening James texted me, meeting set. Tomorrow 2 p.m., Federal Building. Agent O'Caffer will listen. Bring the laptop. I stared at that message for a long time. Tomorrow we'd cross a line, from amateur investigators to official witnesses. There would be no going back. But as I lay in bed that night, I kept thinking about David's young face in that hospital bed. About the voice on that recording threatening him. About the beer bottles that made no sense and the car that swerved like it had been possessed. Someone needed to speak for David Park. Someone needed to demand justice. And if that someone had to be a 60-year-old retired teacher with no business getting involved in corporate espionage and attempted murder, then so be it. I'd spent my career teaching students to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Now it was time to practice what I'd preached. Tomorrow we'd tell the FBI everything, and hope they believed us. The Seattle FBI field office was located in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and security checkpoints. James met me in the lobby at 1:30, carrying a backpack with David's laptop carefully wrapped inside. Nervous, he asked. Terrified, I admitted. What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just paranoid? Agent Hofer isn't like that, she'll listen. He squeezed my shoulder. And Mrs. Thompson, you're the bravest person I know. You could have ignored all of this, stayed safe in your house. But you didn't. We went through security, metal detectors, bag checks, visitor badges. Everything official and intimidating. A young agent escorted us to a conference room on the 3rd floor where a woman in her late 30s waited. She was tall, with close cropped hair and intelligent eyes that assessed us immediately. James, she said warmly, shaking his hand. It's been too long, Sarah. Thanks for seeing us on short notice. This is Clara Thompson, my former teacher. Agent O'Caffer shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Thompson, James spoke very highly of you on the phone. Please both of you sit down. The conference room was windowless and plain, with a long table and recording equipment built into the walls. Agent O'Caffer noticed me looking at it. This is an official interview room, she explained. If what James told me is accurate, I'll need to document everything properly. But before we begin formally, I want to hear the story from start to finish. Take your time. So I told her everything. The accident, the unnatural swerve, the police dismissing it as drunk driving, finding the laptop, the intruder, James cracking the encryption. I showed her the photo of Marcus Chen's business card from the hospital. James pulled up the files on David's laptop, The financial data, the email exchanges, the threatening phone call. Agent Okafor listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against her lips. "This is substantial," she said finally. "If even half of what you're suggesting is true, we're looking at multiple federal crimes. Securities fraud, corporate espionage, possibly attempted murder or conspiracy to commit murder." She looked at us seriously. "But I need to be honest with you both. The evidence you've gathered, while compelling, has significant legal problems." My heart sank. Because we obtained it illegally, partially, but also because we need to establish a chain of custody. A good defense attorney would argue that this laptop could have been tampered with, that the files could have been altered or fabricated. We need more. We need something that directly connects Technova to the car crash. The car's computer system, James said immediately. If someone hacked into the vehicle remotely, there would be logs, traces of the intrusion. That would be untampered evidence. Agent Okafor nodded. Exactly. Where is the vehicle now? City impound lot, probably. The police touted after the accident. She made a note. I can get access to that. We'll need a warrant, but given what you've shown me, I think I can convince a judge. She looked at David's laptop. I'll need to take this into evidence. Our forensics team will create a proper image of the drive, document everything correctly. It may not be admissible in court given how it was obtained, but it gives us a roadmap of what to look for. What about Technova? I asked. Can you investigate them? I can start making inquiries. But Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand something. Technova is a major corporation with annual revenues in the billions. They have lawyers, political connections, resources that most people can't imagine. If we're going to go after them, we need an airtight case. Otherwise, they'll bury us in litigation and make this whole thing disappear. What about David? He's lying in a coma. If Technova realizes we're investigating, I'll request protection for Mr. Park. Hospital security will be notified to only allow immediate family. No business associates, no matter what credentials they show. She pulled out her phone. Let me make some calls. Over the next hour, Agent Okafor worked with quiet efficiency. She called the hospital and arranged for enhanced security on David's room. She contacted a federal judge about a warrant to examine the crashed Tesla. She brought in 2 other agents to begin documenting the contents of David's laptop. There's one more thing, James said. Yesterday at the library we were being watched. A man in a gray suit. He followed us. Agent Okafor's expression darkened. Describe him, James did in detail. She wrote it all down. That's concerning. It means Technova, or whoever's behind this, knows you're involved. She looked at both of us. I want you both to be very careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't return to your homes until we have a better sense of the situation. Do you have safe places to stay? I'm staying with my sister in Bellevue, I said. I can stay with friends in Tacoma, James added. Good. Keep it that way. And if you see anyone following you, or anything suspicious at all, call me immediately. She handed us both business cards with her direct number, day or night. I mean it. As we were preparing to leave, Agent Okafor's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her face changed. Win. I see. Thank you. She hung up and looked at us gravely. That was the hospital. David Park's condition has deteriorated. He's developed complications, brain swelling. The doctors are taking him into emergency surgery now. The room seemed to tilt. Is he going to survive? They don't know. But Mrs. Thompson, the timing is suspicious. This happened right after I called to arrange security. Someone at that hospital may have passed information along. You think someone tried to hurt him? I don't know. But I'm sending agents to the hospital now to secure his room and review the security footage. She stood up. Go back to your sister's house. Stay there. I'll call you as soon as I know more about David's condition and the warrant for the car. James and I left the federal building in a daze. The gray Seattle afternoon felt oppressive, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. This is really happening, I said as we walked to the parking garage. People are really trying to kill him. And they know we're involved now. James scanned the street nervously. Agent Okafor is right. We need to be careful. We parted ways in the garage. James heading to Tacoma, me back to Bellevue. As I drove across the 520 bridge, I couldn't stop thinking about David in surgery, fighting for his life. A young man who'd only wanted to do the right thing, to expose criminal activity, and now he might die for it. I called Linda from the car. I'm on my way back. And Linda? Lock all the doors. Don't open them for anyone you don't know. Clara, you're scaring me. Good, be scared. But trust me, okay? When I arrived at Linda's house, she had indeed locked everything. She'd also made dinner, comfort food, pot roast and mashed potatoes. We ate mostly in silence, the TV playing news in the background. Then my phone rang. Agent Okafor. Mrs. Thompson, I have updates. Some good, some concerning. Tell me. David Park survived the surgery. He's stable but still critical. However, we reviewed the hospital's security footage. Someone did enter his room during the shift change, dressed as a nurse, but the face doesn't match any hospital staff. They injected something into his IV line. Whatever it was caused his complications. I felt cold all over. Someone tried to kill him. In the hospital, Wes, we have images of the suspect, but they wore a surgical cap and mask. We're working on identifying them. However, this proves your theory was correct. Someone wants David Park dead. What about the car? I got the warrant. We'll examine it tomorrow morning. Our forensics team is the best in the country. If there's any evidence of tampering, they'll find it. She paused. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know, you did the right thing coming to us. You potentially saved David's life by pushing this investigation. Without you, we'd never have known to look deeper. After we hung up, I sat with Linda in her living room, staring at nothing. I'd spent my whole life teaching students about heroism in literature, about characters who faced impossible odds, who stood up against injustice even when it cost them everything. I'd never imagined I'd become one of those characters myself. Are you okay? Linda asked softly. No, I admitted. I'm terrified, but I can't stop now. That young man is fighting for his life because he tried to do the right thing. Someone needs to make sure his story gets told. Someone needs to make sure the people who did this pay for it. That someone doesn't have to be you, Clara. You're not law enforcement. You're not an investigator. No, I agreed. I'm a retired teacher. But I'm also the only one who saw that car swerve. I'm the only witness who knew something was wrong when everyone else was ready to call it an accident. If I walk away now, I'm just another person who saw something wrong and did nothing. Linda squeezed my hand. You're the bravest person I know. And the most stubborn. I learned from the best. I said, thinking of all the heroes in all the books I'd taught over the years. The difference was, I couldn't flip to the last page to see if this story had a happy ending. I could only keep moving forward and hope that justice prevailed. Tomorrow, the FBI would examine David's car. Tomorrow, we might finally have proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Tomorrow, Technova Industries might finally have to answer for what they'd done. I went to bed that night with my phone on the nightstand, Agent O'Kafer's number on speed dial, and a baseball bat from Linda's garage propped against the wall. Just in case. Agent O'Kafer called at 9 the next morning. Mrs. Thompson, we've finished examining David Park's Tesla. I think you and James should see what we found. Can you meet me at the FBI field office in an hour? We'll be there. I called James, who drove up from Tacoma, and we met in the same conference room as before. This time, Agent O'Kafer had two other people with her. A man in his 50s she introduced as Agent Robert Martinez, and a younger woman with thick glasses named Dr. Jennifer Wu, a forensic technology specialist. Thank you both for coming, Agent O'Kafer said. Wu has some findings that you need to hear. Dr. Wu opened her laptop and projected images onto the screen at the end of the conference room. The first image showed the interior of David's crashed Tesla, focusing on the dashboard computer system. Modern electric vehicles are essentially sophisticated computers, Dr. Wu began. Every function, steering, braking, acceleration, is controlled by software. This makes them efficient and safe under normal circumstances, but it also makes them vulnerable to hacking. She clicked to the next slide, showing lines of code. When we examined Mr. Park's vehicle, we found something disturbing. Someone had remotely accessed the car's control system 3 days before the accident. They installed malware that gave them the ability to override the driver's inputs. My breath caught. You mean someone could control the car remotely? Exactly. Look at this. She pulled up a log file. At 7:43 p.m. on the night of the accident, someone activated the malware. The steering system received a command to turn hard left, overriding Mr. Park's control. The command came from an external IP address. Can you trace that IP address? James asked, leaning forward. We did. It routes through several proxy servers, but our cyber team eventually traced it back to a location in downtown Seattle. Specifically, to the Technova Industries building on 5th Avenue. The room fell silent. Agent O'Kafer leaned back in her chair. This is the proof we needed. Someone at Technova remotely hijacked David Park's car and caused it to crash. This wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. What about the beer bottles? I asked. The police found them in the car. Agent Martinez spoke up for the first time. We reviewed the evidence from the original police report. The bottles were placed in the vehicle after the crash. There were no fingerprints on them, and the beer inside was warm, meaning they'd been sitting out for hours before being placed in the car. Someone staged the scene to make it look like drunk driving. Ooh, I asked. Who did this? Agent O'Kafer pulled out a folder. That's where things get complicated. The hack originated from Technova's building, but we need to prove who specifically ordered it or executed it. However, we have been investigating Technova's finances based on the information from David's laptop. What we found is extensive fraud, Insider trading, market manipulation, money laundering through shell corporations. It goes back years. She spread documents across the table. The scheme involves at least 3 senior executives. But the person who appears to be orchestrating everything is Marcus Chen, Vice President of Corporate Strategy. The name from the business card. The man who'd tried to visit David in the hospital. David's AI detected their fraud, James said. He threatened to expose them. So they tried to kill him. That's our theory. Agent O'Keefer confirmed. But here's the problem. Marcus Chen is currently in Singapore for a business conference. He has an alibi for the night of the accident, and the actual hack was performed by someone with sophisticated technical skills, likely a hired professional. So Chen ordered the hit, but he made sure he couldn't be directly connected to it, I said. Exactly. We need to connect the dots. We need evidence that shows Chen knew about the hack, ordered it, or paid for it. She looked at James. That's where you might be able to help. You understand this technical world better than most of my agents. Would you be willing to consult on this case? Officially. James didn't hesitate. Yes, whatever you need, good. Dr. Wu will bring you up to speed on everything we know about the hack. We need to find out who executed it and how they were hired. She turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you to do something difficult. Technova is holding their annual investor conference in 3 days at the Seattle Convention Center. It's a major public event with hundreds of attendees. We believe Marcus Chen will be there, along with the other executives involved in the fraud. You want me to attend? I want you to confront him. I stared at her. Excuse me. Agent O'Keefer pulled out another document. We can get you credentials as a financial journalist. You'll approach Chen during the networking reception and ask him questions about David Park. We'll wire you with audio and video equipment. The goal is to rattle him, make him nervous, see if he slips up or contacts his co-conspirators. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as an investigator. You're a civilian, not law enforcement. He won't see you as a threat. And you have a legitimate connection to the case. You're David's neighbor. You witnessed the accident. Your presence will be unsettling to him, but not overtly suspicious. This could be dangerous, Agent Martinez added. If Chen realizes you're investigating him, he already knows, I interrupted. Someone followed us at the library. They know we're involved, which is why we'll have agents surrounding you at all times, Agent O'Keefer said. You'll never be alone. At the first sign of trouble, we pull you out. But Mrs. Thompson, your presence there could be the catalyst we need. Sometimes people make mistakes when they're under pressure. I thought about David still in ICU, still fighting for his life. I thought about the man in the fake nurse's uniform injecting poison into his IV. I thought about the beer bottles planted in his car, the attempt to frame him as a drunk driver, to dismiss his death as his own fault. I'll do it, I said. What do I need to know? Over the next 2 hours, Agent O'Keefer briefed me on the plan. I'd be registered as Clara Thompson, freelance journalist, covering the tech industry. They'd give me a press badge, background credentials that would hold up to basic scrutiny, and a set of questions to ask. I'd wear a wire disguised as a necklace, with a camera button on my jacket. Agents would be stationed throughout the convention center. Some as security, some as attendees, all watching. Your job is simple, Agent O'Keefer explained. Approach Marcus Chen. Introduce yourself as David's neighbor. Ask him about his attempt to visit David in the hospital. Ask him about the business relationship between his company and David's startup. Watch his reaction. Record everything. What if he refuses to talk to me? Then we've learned something. Innocent people don't refuse to talk about traffic accidents involving business partners. Guilty people lawyer up immediately. James pulled me aside before we left. Ms. Thompson, are you sure about this? This isn't like cracking open a laptop. You'll be face to face with someone who's already tried to kill once. I'm sure, I said, though my hands were shaking. James, I've spent my whole life teaching students to find their courage, to stand up for what's right even when it's scary. If I back down now, what kind of hypocrite would that make me? He smiled. You know, I wrote an essay about courage for your class senior year. I got an A, I remember. It was about your mother leaving and how you had to take care of your younger siblings. It was one of the best essays I'd ever read. You told me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. He squeezed my shoulder. Wes, I learned from the best. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Agent O'Keefer had me practice my cover story until I could recite it in my sleep. I memorized details about David's startup, about the tech industry, about financial journalism. They gave me business cards, a fake portfolio of published articles, even a website that would hold up to scrutiny. I visited David once more before the conference. He was still unconscious, still connected to machines, but his vital signs were stable. His parents had arrived from Korea, a dignified couple in their 70s who sat by his bedside holding his hands and speaking to him in Korean. I introduced myself quietly. I'm Clara Thompson, your son's neighbor. I want you to know that we're working to find out what happened to him. He's going to get justice." David's mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said in accented English. "David is a good boy. He would not drink and drive, we know this." "I know it too," I assured her. "And soon, everyone will know it." On the morning of the conference, I put on the most professional outfit I owned, a navy blazer, gray slacks, low heels. Agent O'Keffer met me outside the convention center at 8 a.m. to fit me with the wire. The necklace felt heavy around my neck, though it looked like simple pearls. The button camera on my lapel was invisible unless you knew to look for it. "Remember," she said, checking the equipment one last time, "you're safe. We have 12 agents inside. 4 more outside. If you feel threatened at any moment, just say the word Roosevelt. You're old school. We'll extract you immediately." What if Chun recognizes me from the library? He might. In fact, that might work in our favor. It shows him we're not backing down. She looked at me seriously. "You're doing a brave thing, Clara. David Park is lucky to have you in his corner." The convention center was massive, filled with thousands of people, tech executives, investors, journalists, startup founders. The Technova booth dominated the main exhibition hall, a gleaming display of corporate power with interactive demos and well-dressed representatives. I spent the morning wandering, getting my bearings, watching. I saw Agent Martinez dressed as an AV technician. Another agent I recognized was pretending to be an investor, examining displays. They were everywhere, invisible unless you knew to look. The keynote speeches started at noon. Marcus Chen was scheduled to speak at 2 p.m. about the future of ethical AI in business. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took my seat in the auditorium, 3 rows from the front. When Marcus Chen walked onto the stage, I finally saw the man who'd ordered David's death. He was tall, well-dressed, charismatic. He spoke with confidence about innovation and responsibility, about using technology to make the world better. His words were smooth, practiced, compelling, and completely hollow, because I knew what he really was. A man willing to kill to protect his secrets. A man who'd staged an accident, planted evidence, tried to poison someone in a hospital bed. After his speech, Chen took questions from the audience. Then he exited the stage and headed toward the networking reception, exactly where Agent O'Keffer had predicted he'd be. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and followed him. It was time to face the man who'd tried to destroy my neighbor's life, and I was going to make sure he knew that someone was watching. Someone was fighting back. Someone wasn't going to let him get away with it. The networking reception was held in a ballroom adjacent to the main exhibition hall. Hundreds of people mingled over wine and canapes, making connections, discussing deals, performing the elaborate dance of business networking. Marcus Chen stood at the center of a small group of admirers, holding court like a king. I took a deep breath and approached, my press credentials clearly visible on my lanyard. My heart hammered so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. "Mr. Chen," I said, stepping into a gap in the conversation. "I'm Clara Thompson, freelance journalist. I'm writing a piece about innovation in the Seattle tech community. Do you have a moment?" He turned to me with that polished smile, already extending his hand. "Of course, always happy to talk about our work at Technova." His handshake was firm, confident. Up close I could see he was probably in his mid-40s, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my car. His eyes were intelligent and calculating. "I'm particularly interested in Technova's approach to emerging startups in the area," I said, pulling out a notepad for effect. "Do you actively seek partnerships with smaller companies?" "Absolutely. Innovation comes from everywhere, not just large corporations. We're always looking for promising technologies to invest in or acquire." His tone was practiced, rehearsed. "What about fraud detection? That seems like it would align with your financial services division." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. "It's an interesting field." "Why do you ask?" "I understand Technova was in discussions with a local startup called Sentinel Analytics, run by a young entrepreneur named David Park." The smile never left his face, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Park, yes, I believe our CTO had some preliminary conversations with him. Unfortunately, the technology wasn't mature enough for our needs." "That's interesting, because David Park was developing what experts describe as revolutionary fraud detection software. The kind that could identify financial crimes across complex corporate structures." I kept my voice casual, journalistic. His AI was apparently quite sophisticated. "I'm sure it was impressive for a startup, but Technova has very high standards." He glanced at his watch, a subtle signal that this conversation was ending. "Mr. Park is currently in a coma," I said quietly. "Car accident 3 weeks ago, right around the time those discussions with Technova ended." Chen's expression shifted. The professional mask slipped just slightly. "That's unfortunate. I wasn't aware, really. Because you tried to visit him in the hospital. The nurses have your business card." Now the smile vanished entirely. He studied me more carefully. I'm sorry, what publication did you say you work for? I didn't. But I'm not really here as a journalist, Mr. Chen. I'm David Park's neighbor. I saw his car crash. I saw the way it swerved, like someone else was controlling it. His face went very still. Around us, the party continued, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding. I was acutely aware of the wire around my neck, recording every word. I think you should leave, Chen said quietly. His hand moved toward his phone. David's AI discovered something, didn't it? It found evidence of fraud at Technova. That's why you wanted his technology, not to use it, but to bury it. To make sure no one else could use it to expose what you've been doing. You're making serious accusations without any evidence. His voice was cold now, all pretense of charm gone. Technova has lawyers who would be very interested in discussing this with you. I have evidence, I said, my voice shaking but steady. I have David's laptop, I have his files. I have the recording of your CTO threatening him. And I have friends at the FBI who are very interested in the malware they found in David's car. The malware that came from your building. Chen's face went white. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Then he leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. You're an old woman who doesn't understand what she's gotten herself into. Walk away now, while you still can. Is that what you told David? Right before you hacked his car. His hand gripped my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to be threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Roosevelt, I said clearly. Within seconds, Agent O'Kafer and Martinez appeared on either side of Chen. 2 more agents moved in behind him. The casual party atmosphere around us shattered as people realized something was wrong. Marcus Chen, Agent O'Kafer said, displaying her badge. Please remove your hand from Mrs. Thompson. He let go immediately, his face a mask of shock. What is this? We need you to come with us for questioning regarding the attempted murder of David Park and multiple counts of securities fraud. She nodded to Agent Martinez, who began reading Chen his rights. People were staring now, pulling out phones, recording. Chen's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. This is ridiculous, he said, trying to regain his composure. I want my lawyer. That's your right, Agent O'Kafer said calmly. But I should tell you we've also arrested your CTO, Michael Yates, and your Chief Financial Officer, Patricia Nungayan. One of them is already talking. So you might want to think very carefully about what happens next. The color drained from Chen's face. He looked at me one last time and I saw it the moment he realized he'd lost. That a retired teacher and her former student had unraveled everything he'd built. As the agents led him away, I felt my knees go weak. Agent O'Kafer steadied me. You did it. We got him on tape threatening you, admitting awareness of the investigation. Combined with everything else, we have enough to prosecute. David, I managed. Someone needs to tell David's parents, they already know, and Mrs. Thompson. David woke up an hour ago. He's awake and talking. The doctors say he's going to recover fully. I started crying then, relief and exhaustion and fear all hitting me at once. James appeared from somewhere in the crowd, wrapping me in a hug. You were amazing, he said. Absolutely amazing. The aftermath happened quickly. Technova stock plummeted within hours as news broke of the arrests. More executives were taken into custody. The SEC launched a full investigation into the company's finances. David's encrypted files, now properly documented by the FBI, became key evidence in what the media called one of the largest corporate fraud cases in Pacific Northwest history. 3 days later, I visited David in the hospital. He was sitting up now, still pale and weak, but alive. His parents sat on either side of his bed. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice hoarse. The FBI told me what you did. You saved my life. You saved yourself, I replied, pulling up a chair. Your AI, your evidence, that's what exposed them. I just made sure people paid attention. I was so scared, he admitted. I knew something was wrong with my car right before the crash. The steering wheel just turned on its own. I thought I was going crazy. And then I saw those beer bottles afterward on the news and I realized someone was trying to frame me. They almost succeeded, but they underestimated the power of people who refuse to accept easy answers. David's mother squeezed my hand. You are a blessing. God sent you to help our son. I'm just a nosy neighbor who couldn't let things go, I said, smiling. But David shook his head. You're a hero. You and James both. If you hadn't questioned what happened, if you hadn't investigated, I'd be dead, or in prison for drunk driving, and Technova would have gotten away with everything. 2 weeks later, I was back in my house in Ballard, tending to my dahlia bulbs and trying to return to normal life. James stopped by with coffee and updates. The trial's being fast-tracked, he said, settling into my kitchen chair. Shen's lawyer is already talking plea deals. Turns out when you're facing 20 years in federal prison, suddenly cooperation looks pretty appealing. What about David? He's recovering well. And get this? 3 different venture capital firms have reached out about investing in Sentinel Analytics. His fraud detection AI is suddenly the hottest thing in fintech. He's going to be fine. Better than fine. That's wonderful. I poured us both coffee. And you? What's next for you? James grinned. Actually, Agent Okafor offered me a consulting position with the FBI's Cyber Crimes Unit. Apparently, my work on this case impressed some people. I'd be helping investigate corporate fraud and cybercrime. Real work. Important work. You should take it. I think I will. Thanks to you, Mrs. Thompson. You reminded me what it feels like to use my skills for something that matters. After James left, I sat on my porch, watching the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson's fence had been repaired. The oak tree David's car had hit bore a scar, but it was still standing. Life was returning to normal. But I was different. I'd spent 35 years teaching students about courage, about standing up for what's right, about being heroes in their own stories. I'd never imagined I'd have to live those lessons myself. My phone buzzed, a text from David. Home from hospital. Thank you for everything. Come by for dinner when you're free. My parents want to cook for you. I smiled and typed back, I'd be honored. As the sun set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about all the books I'd taught over the years. All the stories of unlikely heroes who found themselves in impossible situations and chose to fight anyway. I'd always wondered if I'd have that kind of courage if I ever needed it. Now I knew, and the answer was yes. Not because I wasn't afraid. I'd been terrified every step of the way. Because some things, justice, truth, protecting the vulnerable, were more important than fear. David Park had tried to do the right thing and nearly died for it. But he hadn't died. Because one neighbor refused to look away. Because one former student remembered what he'd been taught about making a difference. Because ordinary people, when they worked together, could stand up to even the most powerful corporations. That was the real story. Not about revenge or retribution, but about community. About people looking out for each other. About refusing to accept that the powerful can do whatever they want without consequences. I went inside, made myself dinner, and settled in with a book, a mystery novel, ironically. But this time when the amateur detective uncovered the truth against impossible odds, I didn't think that would never happen in real life. Because now I knew better. Sometimes it does.